Hey Ryan, how do I get project-based learning started at my school? I've gotten some form of this question nearly every day for the last decade from engaged educators just like you. So at Magnify Learning, we've created a free download to get you started. Whether you're a superintendent, principal, coach, or teacher, go to whatispbl.com to get started on your project-based learning journey today. Are you ready to bring project-based learning to your school? The PBL Simplified podcast will help equip you for your PBL journey with weekly need-to-knows, engaging interviews, PBL showcases from facilitators in the classroom, and PBL leadership episodes to move you towards a successful implementation of PBL. Because every learner deserves to be a part of an inspiring story, and we see daily that project-based learning helps make this happen. If you want me to answer your PBL need-to-know on the podcast, visit whatispbl.com and click on Ask Ryan to submit your question.
Welcome to PBL Simplified Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Stoyer, and we've got a great guest for you today in your bonus episode. We've got John Acton, who's a former superintendent, principal, coach, teacher. He's done it all at this point, and he's in an interesting point in his journey. And right now he's outside of the school system talking to schools about how special their people are and giving motivational speeches to learners, to teachers. You're going to love his story. He's been thrown a curveball, and I say it in here, he hits it. He's ready to hit it. So he's got something to say, and our need to know today, I'm going to kind of meld it right into John's talk, because our need to know is more about culture. How do I create a PBL culture? It comes up again and again, probably because we talk about it a lot. So our need to know is, how do we address culture in our staff and our classrooms? And the way you adjust culture in your staff and your classrooms is you care about your people. John Gordon does this really well. He speaks about it, says, if you want to teach your people how to care about people, care about your people, right? We model that process. And I've talked about culture as a current before, right? Like a current in a river, it takes you, even if you're not moving, even if you're not paddling, it takes you in a certain direction. And in fact, if you try to go up current, it's difficult, right? So it's harder to go up current. It's the same thing with a culture. If you have a well-established culture and somebody tries to go against that, one, it's going to be very obvious, and two, it's going to be difficult for them. And really, that's what you want once you have your positive culture established. But when I talk about culture today, and what John Acton is going to talk to us about from Broken Shells, is the idea that this work is more than just standards. Like, it involves people. If you're in any kind of a leadership position, then your work is about people and it's about relationships. More than standards, more than test scores. Those are real things. But if you're a leader, you know it's about people. And John's going to speak to this well. But I want to talk through the idea of how special education is. That when you've got a staff that beyond whatever the next educational buzzword is, whatever test scores come out, whatever good news, bad news is in the paper, if you've got a staff member that's maybe going through something, it's amazing to see how teacher staffs come together and they'll all put t-shirts on, right? They'll all have a pitch in. Something happens where they all rally around each other, and that's a special thing. Like, I don't think that happens in a lot of other industries. If you go through Twitter, and there's a lot of nonsense on Twitter, but you can also see, like, I love my science team. I love my math team. And there's just this picture of them working hard, in some, cinder block room somewhere, trying to do great things for kids. And ultimately, they're doing it with people that they love and appreciate and respect. And when you can build that culture, that is really, really special. So we want to take an episode and almost step out a little bit of maybe some of the nuts and bolts that we might cover with project-based learning or leadership and some of those, and really hit something big. We heard this when Coach John Bacon was on the podcast back in September, the last episode in September, and he just talked about culture is not an add-on. Culture is the thing. It's your foundation. If you're a leader, this is what you work on, is culture. And so I want you to take off that hat that's, taking notes for PLCs or trying to figure out how to crunch your data, and look at your people. Look at your people as people. And when you look at your people as people, they'll look at their learners in the classroom as people. And we know that strong relationships, we've got strong connections to database learning, right? Like, you have to have these strong connections in the classroom, so we need to have them at the staff level. So that's our answer to our need to know is how do you establish a PBL culture is you need to step back and look at, from a leadership point of view, the relationships and the culture that you're creating in your staff. So that's our need to know. Let me give you a quick intro from John Acton, and I'll give another one as I'm speaking to him live. But John, again, has a really interesting story. He's got insights to share, and you really want to bring somebody in that can speak like this to your staff. And maybe it's John. I would recommend John. Obviously, we've got him on the podcast. Like, I can come in and speak about project-based learning, how it engages learners, brings rigor. I can get them fired up. We'll use teacher stories. And there's inspiration in that. John's story is going to be a little bit different. John's story is going to be when life takes a turn and gives you something you don't expect. How do you support each other? How do you move forward with success? How do you expect victory? That's one of his sayings. Expect victory. How do you build a culture? What are your words that people know you're going to say to encourage them? So I really hope you enjoy this podcast with John Acton from Broken Shells. PBL Simplified audience, you are in for a treat today. This is our bonus episode. We've got 5 Wednesdays in November, which means I can bring you a bonus guest. And I think I found just the right one in John Acton. He's devoting his life right now to helping people tell their story. And you know that we're big on the why here on the podcast, so it fits really well. And you're an educational leader if you're listening to this. And John's held all those spots. He's been the coach, the principal, the superintendent. And he'll tell you, but he got a curveball. And he seems like a guy that hits curveballs, though. So he's got some work that he's doing with schools where he's doing some speaking around culture, around your why. And I love this. He's going to push me here to the why nots. So, John, thanks for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ryan. I really appreciate you letting us be a part of this journey. It's really exciting.
Yeah. So, John, every guest that comes on, we ask them, what is your why? Because we think your why for education is what drives us. It's what fills us with passion and that exudes out to others. So I'll ask you that same question. Let's start right there. What is your why for your work?
To me, it's an easy one, and I bet it's pretty simple for every guest you've had on involved with education. Your why is kids. How can you make a positive influence on kids' lives, regardless of age, regardless of grade level. I came from a family of educators, and I was never going to do this. As a
right.
teenager growing up, I was smarter than mom and dad. But lo and behold, here I am 30 years later, just really kind of concluding a day-to-day career in education. And the why really got instilled in me at an early age, before I really knew what I was going to do. My mom was an elementary teacher for over 30 years. And I'll pause right there. Bless the heart of all elementary teachers. They are going straight to heaven.
That's right.
But, with educators, you kind of find your niche. And I knew quickly elementary was not going to be my area. But my mom had this quote she kind of drilled into me. She said, school may be the best part of a child's day. And I didn't get that fully until I had my first classroom. Mm-hmm. And then it really sunk in. Right. And, our ability as educators to have a positive portion of a school day for a kid is something that I think we probably at different times have taken for granted. We all have our own issues as well that surround us. They call it the invisible bubbles. And I'll talk about that more later. But sometimes we forget that these kids have their stuff as well. And sometimes it maybe dilutes our why, as we get frustrated on that. It's 2:30 on Friday afternoon and you get a message from the principal that we got a meeting after school and your why gets challenged. Things, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I think probably very similar for every educator out there. You get into this business to help kids. And then my why is kind of expanded with, as you mentioned, a little bit of a curveball, which we'll talk later. But, the why is it's always about relationships, whether it's relationships with my family, my friends, with my colleagues in the classroom or in a building or district level. But the why is always surrounding how can you make a positive influence in a kid's lives.
Yep. I mean, you're right that is kind of why we tee up the podcast with what's your why. Because when we've got guests on here, they have a passionate why, right? And all educators do. And I think you hit it, is that sometimes it dims, right? And when we do trainings with people, it's 3 days, it's relational, and part of it is just fanning the flame, right? Like we want to get that why out there, and just kind of enhances everything that we're doing at that point.
It's always interesting when you have the beginning of the year, all get together staff gatherings, and I spoke at a district in northern Indiana for their kickoff, and I mentioned this. You have the brand new educators; it's their first day, and they are so excited, and they're scared to death.
Yep.
They don't even know where to park. Everything
That's
is
right.
brand new. And then you have the seasoned veterans that they are on year 20 or year 30 or beyond, and and they've heard every cliche, they've heard every buzzword, as I call it. Sometimes I call it the edubabbles. Whatever the magic bullet is, they've heard all of those things, and their enthusiasm is slightly different. I say that the most important thing that happens for seasoned educators on the first day is texting each other, see where they're going to go for lunch. So the whys have adjusted. But when you, just as you said, when you can fan the flame, when you can drill it down and say, why did you get into this? Who influenced you? Who helped you get to this point of the career? Then you can get people to remind themselves why they're in it. And really, I think it kind of reinvigorates people. And no different than an athlete or a coach. You want people to finish strong. You really want educators to finish strong with wherever they are in their career. But especially the veteran teachers that have just seen it all. And maybe are sometimes a little more hesitant to some of the new language or concepts or ideas because they've seen them.
Yeah, that's right. And, but you also don't want to get cynical with those veteran folks, right? Because they're there for the right reasons. Their why is there. We see that with project-based learning, that there's a hesitancy of, I don't want this to be a new thing. And, if it's going to go away, I'm going to wait it out. But it's because they want the right things for kids, right? And we see that, if we fan that flame on the why, and we find with PBL, that's our bent here on the podcast, is that veteran teachers get reinvigorated. We just had a podcast episode she was a 28-year veteran teacher, and she said, I just had my best year ever with this PBL unit, and just get it going again. Yeah. So I think that's what I appreciate about kind of your new journey. And I'd like you to speak into that a little bit. You mentioned you were at a district up north in Indiana, but it wasn't yours, right? Like you don't necessarily have your district, but you're not out of schools, right? You're not out of schools. You're in the system. You are fanning that flame. So can you tell us a little bit more about Broken Shells, Expect Victory, and the work you're doing now?
Sure. I appreciate you allowing me to talk about it. So we had to do a little bit of a pivot in life. I say, sometimes these invisible bubbles we all have stuff that surrounds us, and sometimes they're not always visible to people, what's going on in our lives. It's actually tomorrow will be the second 2-year anniversary of my diagnosis with cancer. And it came out of the blue. It was a complicated year 2 years ago, right, as COVID hit. We tried to throw in as many things as possible at once in that year. But the cancer journey of mine is no more difficult or complex than anyone else's. So this is not a poor me discussion. It's maybe somewhat unique because there were three of us, three friends. We all started teaching together at a school corporation in Indiana called Avon. And we really kind of grew up together. For lack of a better word, we were our own little group of coaches or little mini fraternity. We every single day for about 10 years, we met in my classroom before the start of the school, of the school day. And sharing stories, that camaraderie that gets built up. And I think only teachers that have that relationship with their peers really understand that. Well, in such a bizarre aspect, things that you couldn't even sell to Hollywood, the three of us were all diagnosed with the exact same cancer within a 10-month window. And it has obviously thrown a wrench in all of our plans. So we call ourselves kind of the three dudes with cancer. And I was sitting in a chemotherapy session, and kind of the poor me's creep in, but you're thinking, what am I going to do? Am I going to be able to continue what I'm doing now, my career in education? At this point, I was a superintendent. Being a superintendent doesn't allow you the opportunity to miss many school days. It's just not practical.
Right.
So we kicked around, or I'd always kicked around this idea, never knew exactly what to do with it, but had been blessed to walk the beaches at different times in Florida for fall breaks or spring breaks or summer, whatever it was. And I'd always the beach is just kind of my second home. Just relaxing, and allowed me to be creative and come up with thoughts and what we're going to do with the school. But I would always look for the iconic shell, fan-shaped shell, that shell logo, for lack of a better word. Never could find it. Found hundreds, thousands of broken shells, discolored, weird shapes, chips, pieces missing. And when I was sitting there in that chemotherapy chair, it really hit me and said, that we're all broken shells. And I don't think I'm the first one to use that terminology or that analogy, but maybe we're using it in a little bit different capacity, because it's not only are we broken shells, we all have stuff. It's what we're going to do with those things that make us us.
Yeah, that's right.
Really kind of, as you said, these are the things that create our life stories. These whys and why nots are the things and the moments and the singular points of time that really define what we do and how we progress. So broken shells evolved also with, I'm an old coach. It's good the audience can't see me because I have a face for radio. This old coach of me was very competitive. So I'd always used on the signature of my emails or correspondence, expect victory. So, kind of combining this concept that we all have stuff in every single one, whether it's cancer or depression or anxiety or you name it. But then we got to figure out what we're going to do with it. So the expect victory concept was, regardless of what we have, we're going to find a way to overcome this. And there's different levels of victory. Some victories are just being able to make it through the day. And I've had those moments during this journey where the absolute very best I could do was get out of bed after 8 hours straight of doing nothing and make it to the restroom. That was it. That was a victory for the day. So I think sometimes in our world, we correlate victory. It's got to be a Super Bowl championship or whatever. Sometimes it's just having the courage to make it through the day and say, thankfully I made it, and let's do it again.
Well, and John, I think that resonates with our listener right now, right? As we're going through COVID, we're on the other side of it, but I hear principal after principal, teacher after teacher, like, this is the hardest year of education I've ever had, right? And I think there were a lot of, let's make it through the day, right? And
yes.
Right, knowing there's better things ahead. I've also heard principals kind of go right in the second part of your message of expect victory, of like, hey, we've made it through some really tough. It's time to do it. Like they're starting to turn up the gas a little bit and get their foot on the pedal and get back to it.
I think you're exactly right. Of all this time period when COVID hit, here's a real interesting backstory. I started my career as a superintendent on March 2nd. Of 2020. 10 days later, I shut the district down. and so I had a 10-day honeymoon of people kind of liking me, and that was it. But from that point, just as you said, making it through, I think last year was probably the most difficult year in education for people, even harder than when COVID hit. But last year, I think, was just accumulation of nonstop stress and anxiety and it kind of came to a head, I think, which is why we saw some of the exodus of education. But to get to this point this year, when schools can operate without some of the restrictions, without the masks, and without the arrows pointing walk this way in the hallway and not the next, and some of the things that people I think we just kind of threw darts at the wall, going, is this what's going to help us? Because nobody knew. But to get rid of those things and the phrase is, let's get back to normal. I'm not sure if normal is, we're in a new normal, but the opportunity to create this new normal, I think, has got to be really exciting for educators. To take a deep breath and say, just as you said, we've gone through the hardest part in the history of education ever. Now let's go see what we can do. What have we learned? How can we adjust things? What I would say is, it does not matter what comes out, what philosophy, just as PBL still is based on relationships. So it's how are you going to utilize these to your advantage, understand the lessons you've learned. But I think it's a pretty exciting time for those that really want to get after it.
Yeah, well, that's our audience, right? So that's our audience. And then part of what I like to do on this, like especially in these special guest ones where, it's an additional bonus episode, is you're out speaking to schools and districts, Indiana, across the country. I like to maybe steal a little bit of that speech, right? So like, can we grab some of that? And really, to tie that into PBL, he says relationships, and we tie that back to culture. We think culture is just super important. I kind of talk about like a current in a river. Even if you're not doing anything, right? It's pulling you in that right direction. So if we've got, and I know we do because we get the questions, principals, assistant superintendents, and the culture isn't where they want it to be yet. Maybe it's not bad, right? It's not toxic, but kind of mediocre. It's not positive. What do you tell those types of leaders? What do you tell those school districts where they really want to ramp up the culture?
I say that the single most important factor in determining your overall success, whether it's a school, whether it's a business, is your intentional focus on climate and culture. Mm-hmm. It is the foundational piece to success. It defines everything else that's going to happen.
Right. It's not an add-on.
No, it is. If you don't invest your time in that, you can have the greatest widget in the world, whatever is coming out. But if people aren't bought into what you're hoping to accomplish, I guess the simplest way to say it in education is, are you going to work or are you going to school? Because that's a completely different mindset. And if you're going to school, you can make magic happen. But if you haven't invested in the creation of a positive climate and culture, then you're going to waste a lot of time. And I had a colleague, he's the principal of Bluffton High School up in northern Indiana. He's been former principal of the year in the state. His name's Steve Baker. He gave me this analogy with climate and culture, and I pass it along. I always give him credit for it. He said, because sometimes we mix climate and culture, and I don't think there's a police that are going to arrest you if you get it wrong, but because it's you're headed in the same direction. But
yeah,
climate are those things. It's like a thermometer. Those things are those immediate things that you can do to try to enhance the positive nature, whether it's a classroom or a school. And the culture are more of the traditions, the norms, the things that are long-standing. So, we made a very intentional and consistent focus when I was as a building principal, and then we're starting to do it as a district. As simple as it is, we made a calendar and we held ourselves accountable to that. These are the things that we are going to do that are going to focus on these climate and culture aspects for our students, but also just as important for the staff.
Yes.
If you want your students to have success, you got to have a happy staff, and you want your staff that wants to be involved and be at your location, your school. So I think if I could tell anybody the single most important piece of advice is make it a priority and hold yourself to that. Fires can come at any point, hopefully not literal, but one phone call in the morning can disrupt your entire day as a school administrator, as a teacher. One unplanned fire drill. Your classroom is in a little bit of disarray for a while. Well, the easiest thing I think in our world is we got to get back on track. We got to get right back to the standards. We got to get right back on the curriculum. And you can sometimes kick to the curb those ideas that you're going to implement to enhance your climate and culture. Easiest thing to say, we'll get to it next week. And I think that's a mistake. And it's a mistake that I've learned through experience that doing just that, I got to get back to the standards. I got to get all this covered. We got to make sure we're doing all this. When we made it priority to say, we're going to stay the course, we're going to plan ahead, we're going to be a collaborative group here, and we're not going to do this on our own. I call it, to get things accomplished with climate and culture, like I said, there's kind of three stages. There's the on stage, the backstage, and the front stage individuals. And everybody has a role. And when you get everyone involved and are consistent with it, you really can have magic happen. And when I say this, I hope people understand I'm not trying to blow smoke or give credit. This is not me, but what we were able to establish at the small school in central Indiana that had very limited success. We created a vision, we had a plan, and we executed a plan, and we turned a school that was performing, but turned it into an exceptionally high-performing school and became a national blue ribbon school. I'll say it until the day I die. It wasn't because we had a magic bullet. It was because we made it a priority that we were going to have fun.
Mm-hmm.
And when people enjoy what they are doing, everything else is just amped up. So our scores, our test scores, our performance on assessments, our discipline, everything improved because it was just the place to be. And for a brief period of time, we said we kind of struck lightning, and we had magic happen. Having left, I understand now how difficult that was, how magical a period of time that was, but it also reminds me that it is possible.
There you go. Yeah.
It is possible without a tremendous amount of resources and financial aspects. It doesn't cost any money to be nice.
So if I'm a principal and I say, yep, I agree with that, John, before I ask you this question of like what their first step's going to be, I want to give my listener a couple of quotes from you. Schools are a business, but the business of schools are relationships. And then another one, data is nice, but people are nicer. I love the heart of that, right? Because it's all moving towards relationship. It's all about the people. And if you've got a staff culture that is toxic, it's crazy to think that your classroom culture is going to be positive, isn't it?
Yeah, totally agree. It's that adage, if you have the best way to get rid of cancer is to cut it out. Unfortunately, sometimes that's the way with staff. You have staff that it's not the place they want to be. And you do your very best to nurture and support and promote and say, come on, get on board with this. I need you. But ultimately, sometimes it's just not the right fit for individuals. So getting the individuals on that want to be a part of something, I think is just as important. Deciding who can't be a part of it, as deciding how much time, effort, and emphasis you're going to be to try to get someone as a convert. And there are 1,000 different strategies with that. But as you just said, it is and always will be about the relationships that you build with your staff, the staff builds with the students, and you all build together. I was a superintendent, and it is absolutely superintendents are in charge of a multi-million dollar corporation.
Yeah, that's right.
It is what it is. But if all you're doing is worried about the numbers, you're worried about this data point, this curriculum aspect, and you don't see what's behind that, behind every data point as a kid, behind every statistic, behind every human resource component is a face, one of your staff members who have their own families and their own problems and their own bubbles, with stuff. You just lose out on the opportunities to do something special. And unfortunately, I think some people may go their entire career and never understand that. They're successful, they're efficient, but they don't. There's a Nick Saban quote that said, "High achievers don't like mediocre people, and mediocre people don't like high achievers." And I think it's pretty accurate, regardless of profession.
Yeah. So I want to hit one more thing before we tell people how they can connect with you.
Yes, sir.
And I want to come back. It's in your vision statement at Broken Shells that you're helping people create their life stories through their whys and their why nots. Can you expand on that a little bit for us in both the life story work, but also the whys and the why nots? Because I'm all about the whys, right? Like that's my tagline is live your why. I sign books that way. We've got stickers, but the why nots that intrigues me.
Sure. I think you kind of alluded to maybe the process. When I said when you're sitting in a chair for about 8 hours getting stuff pumped into, you have a lot of time to reflect on life, right?
True.
So yep. I was thinking just the whys. What are your whys? My family. I have two young boys. One that's age 7 and one that's age 14, and we've had some real tough conversations about what our future is. And people whys are similar, whatever your family is, whatever your friends are. But when I was sitting in those chairs, it was, my life story and everyone's life story is also congruent with the why nots, those moments in time where either you decide to do something or you don't. And I just had this conversation with a school or a group of administrators last week. The why nots in life are going to define your life stories as well. And I used just a simple analogy of, why not eat the chocolate cake first? There is no food police that are going to come and arrest you.
That's right. Let's do it.
In the moments of you have to just decide if you're going to be vulnerable with yourself and with others and not be afraid to smile and maybe look silly, and not be afraid to go after things that have held you back, whatever it is, whether it's some people out here listening and their ultimate goal is to become a principal, but they just haven't taken the classes yet. Well, why not? What are you waiting for? Go on to be a superintendent, whatever what you believe is your path. But why not, if you're just enjoying doing what you're doing, why not stay in the classroom where you can have the most impact on kids? Chase the golden ladder and think that I need to be a principal where the day-to-day interaction, the influence on kids is actually in the classroom. And that's just a school analogy, but we've had to do some why nots with our life and our family, and trips that we weren't going to take. We've decided, why not? Why are we waiting? And I'll do a silly little car analogy. Educators, everyone on this podcast will understand you're not doing this profession to get wealthy, and it does not matter what position. I know there were some superintendents, at least in the state of Indiana, they were getting paid very well. I was not one of those. So my vehicle was a 98 red Chevy pickup. I think it has 300,000 miles. Maybe not befitting what people thought was the vehicle the superintendent had, but that's what we had and what it was paid. And, well, I was sitting with my insurance agent, who had actually been a principal of mine at one point. He said, "John, why are you waiting on getting a car?" And I looked at Brad is his name, and then went home and talked to my wife and said, what are we waiting on? Now, we didn't go buy a Ferrari. We bought a used car, but one that we felt comfortable wouldn't break down, like the red 98 red race truck. And it was that why not moment of life. I'm not encouraging everyone to go jump off the bridge or do something silly. But if you're waiting on something, you said, I don't know if I have it in me to do this. These are those moments of life that are defining your life story. You're either going to do it or you're not. So we've added that to this concept of the whys and the why nots.
I think it's great. I love the why not, just the push. Again, in our work with teachers across the country in these workshops is, well, I'm kind of worried. I don't know if I'm going to call a community partner. Like, well, why not? Like the worst they can do is say no, and almost 98% of the time they say yes. It's like, why not?
Yes.
I love adding that into the message. I think it's a great message for kids. Well, people in my family, my friends, we don't take AP courses. Well, why not? I mean, just why not try it? My family, we're not engineers. Well, why not? Right? Why not you? Like, why not be the first one?
Exactly. I've had the opportunity to talk to some students and specifically some student athletes, football players over the last 2 or 3 weeks, talking to some teams. And I'm an old coach, but you just hit the phrase that we say, why not us? Why not you? Why? Someone's going to end their season in Lucas Oil holding a big trophy, being a state champion. Why not you? What separates you from anyone else? But it starts with the mindset. So it is exactly what you're describing. And whether it's, as you said, I think it's a great analogy, take the AP class. Why not you go to college? Or if you're going the CTE route, why not pursue the career, the passion, whether it's computers or hands-on or whatever that aspect. Why not? What are you waiting for? Are you waiting for someone else's opinion of you? You're afraid of that? And they are not going to be with you to pay the bills or chase down your dreams.
That's right. So, John, you've got a book that's out right now that people can go grab. You're speaking to adults, right? In classrooms, you can speak to students. What's the best way for people to connect with you?
I really appreciate that. We have of all things in the world, we have our own website now, which is called brokenshells.net. We didn't go with .com because I was $8,000 for that domain name, and it was $17 for .net.
Somebody already had that one, huh? They're hanging on to it.
Or just holding on to it.
Yeah.
So in that, we have these different services, and we're doing these motivational speeches, whether they're to schools or kids or to businesses as well. We're starting that avenue as well, which has been pretty exciting. We have a consulting aspect, a climate and culture aspect, which is called Fins Up, Fins Forward, which is kind of it's a blend of everyone's a thief in education, right? But stealing some concepts from Walt Disney, stealing some concepts from the fish philosophy of John Christensen, and stealing some concepts from invitational education from Dr. Perky. And we combined it to create the Fins Up, Fins Forward concept, which was that intentional focus. Of all things, we have T-shirts. We have an Expect Victory T-shirt, and we have a Broken Shells T-shirt with the idea of just spread the message. Spread that idea that you're okay. If you're broken, man, you're like everybody else.
Yep.
And then I appreciate you alluding to the book. The book is called Broken Shells. It's our journey through cancer, loss, love, and leadership. There are probably 10,000 cancer books out there. We kind of made it a little bit unique because my wife is already an author. She wrote a book on teacher trauma called Throwing Rocks. Well, we kind of go back and forth. I tell my perspective of this cancer journey, and then Lindsay, as the caretaker, tells her version of it. And it's been interesting reading each other's thoughts. Some things that I didn't know that she was dealt with, and some things she didn't know I had dealt with. So I hope it provides some hope and motivation for people. And if it helps one person, that all of that is, then it's worth it. It'd be great if we could pay some bills with it, but one step at a time. Right?
I think you'll help more than one person. I know an assistant principal who's a good friend who she just found out that she's got cancer, and man, she's fighting it. She said, "Let's go." There's the curveball, but we're going to hit it. So I think your message resonates. I appreciate your humble heart, but I also want to expound that message, because you've got a message that matters. You've got a message that's going to resonate with people, and people want to hear from people that are in the work. And that's what the secret sauce to Magnify Learning is. We've got teachers that are doing the work. There are trainers. So when people hear this message, they want to know somebody who's been a coach, a principal, a superintendent, that you're in education, you know what we're doing, you know what we're going through, and you've got hope, and that we can expect victory. So John, thanks for being on today. Gosh, I appreciate it.
I really appreciate you having me. Thank you, sir. And best of luck. I think what you're doing is monumental to help kids, help teachers, to help school districts. So thank you for what you're doing.
Absolutely. Listeners, it is all about the kids. You heard it from John. We know that we can equip the adults to help the kids. So there's a lot of different avenues to do that. We talk about energy, work, and love on this podcast. As leaders, you've got to take care of all of it, not just your work. So understanding your life story, living out your whys and your why nots now. We might have to adjust some things. John's pushing us. So take this message, go buy the book, support John's work, because it's going to support you in the long haul, and it's going to support those that are on your staff, right? So bring this message into your work on that climate. It's number one. It's not an add-on. And get out there and expect victory.